So, Mongolia. You might picture, sprawling grasslands, nomadic cultures, a history that feels relatively recent in the grand scheme of things.
Right, that's the common image.
But what if the story of human innovation there goes back much, much further, specifically with something like pottery?
Well, that's exactly what we're digging into today. Prepare for a bit of a recalibration.
This deep dive is really about shaking up that timeline.
It absolutely is. What's truly groundbreaking is the recent work by Dr. Przemysław Bobrowski and his colleagues.
Yes, their papers.
Their findings, published in Radiocarbon and another paper, The Earliest Holocene Wanderers. They present really compelling new radiocarbon dates from Mongolia.
And these dates push back the timeline for pottery significantly.
Yeah, significantly. By quite a bit, actually. It really changes our understanding of when pottery first shows up there.
Okay, so today we're heading back, way back, to the early Holocene, that period just after the last big ice age.
Warming up, things are changing.
Right. And specifically, we're zooming in on the Gobi Desert. Our mission, really, is to unpack what these new discoveries tell us about the hunter-gatherers living there.
And their surprisingly early use of pottery, something we often associate with, much later, more settled farming groups.
Exactly. So prepare for maybe a different perspective on prehistoric life in Central Asia.
Okay, so to really get the impact here, we need to set the scene a bit. Geographically, historically...
Where exactly are we talking about?
The research focuses on the Tsakhurtyn-Hundi region. It's in southern Mongolia, maybe 700 kilometers south of Ulaanbaatar.
Okay.
It's within a mountain range called the Arts-Bogdan-Nuru Massif.
Yeah.
And Tsakhurtyn-Hundi, well, it translates to Flint Valley.
Flint Valley, that name itself tells a story, doesn't it? Hints at ancient tool-making.
It really does. And we're not talking just a few scattered tools. This is a huge prehistoric landscape.
So lots of evidence.
Massive amounts. Dr. Bobrowski's team points out that earlier expeditions, around the year 2000, identified sites from the early, middle, and late Paleolithic. That's the Old Stone Age.
Wow, so a really long history of occupation.
Exactly. The sheer abundance of flint outcrops and all the artifacts found near them, it makes it one of the most extensive prehistoric areas in Central Asia. Just surprisingly understudied in detail until recently.
Right. So despite knowing it was rich, there wasn't much deep work done.
Precisely. So this current project aimed to fill that gap, really analyze the long-term settlement patterns.
What were their specific goals?
Well, things like reconstructing the ancient environment, figuring out a detailed timeline for when people were there, and understanding how they used local resources like that flint.
Makes sense. And their initial surveys. Did they find much right away?
Oh, yeah. They found this network of ancient lake beds, paleolakes, just south of the Arts-Bogdan-Nuru Mountains.
So water sources, always key.
Always. And these weren't just dry hollows. They found numerous sites around them with signs of human activity going way back into the Pleistocene, the Ice Age, and then right into the early Holocene.
So hunter-gatherers were clearly drawn to these lakeside spots.
Definitely. And one paleolake in particular, Kuri, they called it Lake V, became the main focus for this study. 3 key sites right on its old shoreline yielded a really fascinating mix of artifacts.
Okay, so beyond the flint tools, what else did they find? What gives us that richer picture?
Well, the lithics, yes, the stone tools, but also artifacts made from ostrich eggshells.
Ostrich eggshells. Interesting. Tell us about the animals around back then.
Right. They found beads and pendants made from the shells of the East Asian ostrich, which is now extinct. Struthio andersoni. It used to roam that whole area.
Wow. Beads and pendants. Art, decoration.
And crucially, for our discussion, fragments of pottery.
Yeah.
And the remains of hearths, fireplaces.
Hearths, okay, now we're talking dating, charcoal.
Cool. Exactly, that's the gold standard. So the team got 11 radiocarbon dates from these Kuri sites.
And what did the dates show?
They revealed 2 main periods when people were actively using these sites. There's a younger phase dating to roughly 10,620 to 10,535 calibrated years before present.
Calibrated, meaning adjusted for atmospheric carbon changes.
Precisely. Makes the dates more accurate. Those younger dates came from 2 sites, FV133 and FV134A.
Okay. And the older period?
The older phase dates to around 11,251 to 11,196 calibrated years BP. That came from site FV139.
11,000 years ago. So these dates alone are pretty significant. Some of the earliest solid evidence for Holocene hunter-gatherers in the Gobi.
Yeah, that in itself is a big contribution.
Yeah.
But then Then there's the pottery.
Right, the game changer.
It really is, because the previous understanding, the accepted date for the earliest pottery in Mongolia, was around 9,600 calibrated years BP.
Okay, so mid-10th millennium BP.
Yes, but the pottery found at Barun Kuri, it was directly associated with those dated hearths. In context, and the radiocarbon results put that pottery almost 2,000 years older than the previous estimate.
Whoa, 2,000 years. That's huge. That's not just tweaking the dates. That's a fundamental shift.
It completely changes the timeline for this key technology in the region. And the researchers stress, early pottery finds anywhere in Mongolia are pretty rare. So this discovery is particularly important.
So what did this ancient pottery actually look like? Was it crude or?
Well, the fragments they describe are typically gray to dark gray, sometimes reddish, not very thick, maybe 7 or 8 millimeters maximum.
Okay.
But what's really fascinating, as Dr. Bobrowski points out, is that these dates, they line up chronologically with early pottery found over in northern China.
Northern China. Interesting. So potential connections, maybe shared ideas spreading across the landscape that early?
It certainly raises that possibility. It makes you think about how connected these early groups might have been, even across potentially challenging terrain.
Definitely. Okay, so moving beyond the pottery for a sec.
Yeah.
What else do we know about these people? Their lifestyle, their other tools?
Well, the stone tool evidence points to them using a pretty sophisticated technology. Microblades. They used wedge-shaped cores to make these tiny, sharp blades.
Microblades. Very efficient use of stone, right? Versatile little tools.
Exactly. Likely used for all sorts of things. Hunting gear, processing hides, preparing food, you name it.
And this is all happening in the early Holocene, which, as you said, was a time of climatic change.
Right. After the peak cold of the last glacial maximum, things were generally getting warmer and, in some periods, wetter.
Which would make the Gobi more habitable.
Potentially, yes. The researchers talk about an Oasis 1 phase, roughly 13,500 to 8,000 years ago. This period saw ecological shifts, including more moisture becoming available after a preceding cold, dry snap called the Younger Dryas.
So the climate becoming more favorable likely allowed these hunter-gatherer groups to expand into areas like the Gobi.
It seems that way. They were adapting, moving into new niches as the environment changed, and this early pottery might be part of that adaptation story.
Right, not just random invention, but maybe serving a purpose in this changing world. Do they compare Barun Kuri to other early sites nearby, like Chikinagui Cave?
They do mention other sites, yeah, like Chikinagui. But it sounds like the dating at some of those other locations might be a bit less secure, perhaps not having that direct artifact hearth association.
Ah, okay. So that direct association at Barun Kuri is really key. How critical is that for archaeologists?
Oh, it's absolutely crucial. Finding pottery fragments directly within the charcoal layers of a dated hearth, that's the kind of context you dream of. It removes so much ambiguity.
So you know the pot and the fire date to the same time.
Exactly. It provides really high confidence in these surprisingly early dates for the pottery. And get this, they even found decorative impressed patterns on some fragments.
Decorated. 11,000 years ago. Wow. That suggests more than just pure utility, doesn't it?
It really does. Maybe some cultural expression, symbolism, even for these mobile groups. It adds another fascinating layer. And importantly, the researchers note that this Barun Kuri pottery looks different stylistically, technologically from the later Neolithic ceramics found elsewhere in Mongolia.
So maybe a distinct earlier ceramic tradition that didn't directly lead into the later stuff.
That's a possibility they raise. It really offers fresh insights into how these Gobi hunter-gatherer societies were changing and when key technologies like pottery actually arrived on the scene.
Okay, and they also tackled a potential issue with radiocarbon dating, something called the old carbon effect. Can you quickly explain that, why it's not a problem here?
Sure. The old carbon effect is basically a risk that the carbon you're dating isn't solely from the time the organism died. For example, if plants grow in water containing very old dissolved carbon, maybe from ancient limestone, the C14 date can appear artificially old.
Ah, okay, so the lake water itself could skew the dates.
Potentially, yes. But the researchers looked carefully at the geology around Barun Kuri. They concluded that during the early Holocene, the Gobi Altai mountain glaciers weren't significantly feeding this lake.
Meaning the water wasn't likely contaminated with ancient carbon.
Exactly. The local geology basically rules out a significant old carbon effect, which further strengthens the reliability of these early dates they got for the hearths and, by association, the pottery.
Got it. Okay, so let's pull all this together. If you had to state the single most significant takeaway from this deep dive, what would it be?
I think the headline really is that revised timeline for pottery in Mongolia, pushing it back by nearly 2,000 years to as early as maybe 11,250 calibrated years before present. That's huge.
Yeah.
And the fact that these dates overlap with the earliest pottery emerging in northern China, that connection, or at least parallel development, is really intriguing. It fundamentally changes how we see these early hunter-gatherers.
Right, so instead of pottery being this later invention tied strictly to farming.
Exactly. We see mobile hunter-gatherers living in a challenging environment like the Gobi, adopting or inventing pottery much, much earlier than we thought.
Which just opens up so many questions, doesn't it? Like,
Mm.
why? What did having pottery do for them?
That's the next frontier, really. Did it change their diet? Could they boil different foods, maybe extract more nutrients? Did it affect how they stored things, how mobile they were?
Or maybe it had social or ritual significance we haven't even considered.
All possible. This discovery just blows open the doors for new research. It forces us to ditch some old assumptions about technological development, always following a neat, linear path.
Yeah, innovation happens everywhere,
Yeah.
in all sorts of contexts.
Precisely. And the fact that these groups in the Gobi were doing this so early, it's a testament to human adaptability and ingenuity. As the team continues analyzing these artifacts, hopefully we'll learn even more about what this early pottery meant to them.
It really underscores that resourcefulness, doesn't it? And hints at maybe a more connected prehistoric world than we often imagine. A truly fascinating glimpse into the lives of the Gobi's earliest Holocene inhabitants.